E nā mana, e nā reo, e nā karanga maha o te wā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. He wahine kai whakahaere o te Speak Up for Women. Ko Annie toku ingoa, nō re rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello everyone, my name is Annie O'Brien, and I'm the spokeswoman for Speak Up for Women. Before I begin, I do want to flag that I'll be discussing some pretty upsetting realities around sexual violence in particular. I'll be using language I didn't expect to ever be using in Parliament, but it is necessary, and we at Speak Up for Women have become accustomed to being the ones unafraid to have the conversations that need to be had. I will start by reading a thread posted on Twitter recently by a young feminist called Erin. Boys started bringing porn magazines to school when I was in the 4th grade. My friends and I started watching it at sleepovers when I was 11 because we'd heard so much about it. Seeing adult women being choked and spit on and violently fucked is traumatizing for young women who already lack positive role models. Young minds can't process porn. What's real and what's not, what's expected and what's non-consensual. All we see is bodies being handled like meat, and supposedly they like it. Do I like it? Do I have to do this? Is this sex? It doesn't help that our teen years are when we begin to be told things like don't go out at night, don't dress like that or you're asking for it, be careful dancing like that, you should cover up. We go from children to targets, all because we develop breasts and curves. We all have the friend who starts cutting, the friend who starts giving blowjobs to boys who don't text her afterwards, the friend who hikes up her skirts after she leaves the house, the friend who never eats. We watch our female peers crumble under girlhood. We become numb. On TV, we watch crime shows about raped and murdered women, or caricatures of femininity in designer clothes on Riverdale. We're bombarded with music videos of skinny, naked women. We soak in this media in our most formative years. Women are pretty, women are sexy, women are victims. Teenage boys aren't told to carry pepper spray or rape whistles. They take karate for fun, not for fear of being attacked. They watch movies about brotherhood on sports teams, not cheerleaders hating each other. They don't read magazines full of men with cosmetic surgery. The profound pain and loss that occurs when transitioning from a young girl constantly told life is full of promise and she can be anything she wants, to a teenager who is a sexual object, a target of her peers and a victim, is life-changing. So many of us don't recover. We all come out of teenage girlhood scathed in one way or another. Being a teenage girl is not sexy, it is not cute, and it's not something that men will ever understand. Why do we even need feminism anymore? It is a question often levelled at me. Why do we need feminism? I began with Erin's tweets because they neatly encapsulate the hostile world young women are expected to navigate, all while remaining functional, with a smile on their face, being told this is the best woman I've ever had it. How can anyone live in this world and not see what women are enduring, particularly young women? However, when we view feminism through the eyes of those not so engaged with the intricacies of feminist politics, we can understand where their scepticism comes from. They aren't seeing my feminism. They aren't seeing Speak Up for Women's feminism. They're seeing choice feminism. A feminism which is whatever any given woman at any given time says is feminism. Today, I will be answering the question, I hope, of why we need feminism, now as much as ever. Not today's choice feminism, but the feminism of our foremothers, the collective class struggle for women's liberation. I am not a sex-positive feminist. It is hard to admit that, not because I'm embarrassed by my stance, but because the language that has been used to legitimise the sex-positive movement makes it deliberately difficult for us to assert ourselves against it. No one wants to be sex negative. This evokes images of Victorian repression, prudishness, and the boring kind of woman who will never find a man. Sex positivity began as an anti-shaming movement. It asserted that women should not be shamed for being sexual beings. So far, so good. However, as tends to happen, postmodernists, liberal elites, and the usual navel-gazers took it a step further, and then another, and another, until we are now being told that critiquing violence and sex, or furries, or grown men in diapers is kink-shaming, and inherently anti-feminist. After all, how can we be feminists if we're policing women's sexuality? According to choice feminism, if a woman wants to be choked and beaten during sex, then choking and beating during sex is feminist. What this neglects to acknowledge is that it's overwhelmingly men dressing up as animals or in diapers. It is men who commit vile acts of violence against women and call it rough sex. It is their sexuality we're really being told not to shame. Campaign group We Can't Consent to This has examined 58 instances where the defence of sex gone wrong has been used for murder in the UK alone. This defence has seen some success. 16 cases resulted in the downgraded conviction of manslaughter. 3 cases where charges were not pursued, and 2 cases where the accused was found not guilty. In 100% of these cases, the accused was a man. We are, of course, acutely aware of this defence in New Zealand currently, as it plays out in a case heavily covered by the media. To respect the processes of the court, I will not go into this further at this time. Choice feminists will defend violence against women so long as it's in the name of male pleasure. They provide a shield for all number of depraved kinks by endorsing the acts as feminist. Where our feminist foremothers fought for our sexual liberation and against male violence, those inhabiting their once incredible organisations have enabled a culture where anything but total sexual inhibition, including acts that aren't pleasurable for women and are in fact incredibly painful, is anti-sex positivity and anti-feminist. Teen Vogue is on hand to help, though. The popular magazine targeted at teenagers is there to recommend which numbing lubricant our daughters should use to make it easier to endure the sex we're all supposed to be so positive about. The kind of sex that they and their male peers have learnt to see as normal, having been exposed to endless amounts of increasingly violent pornography. Whereas once access to porn was a stack of monthly magazines and maybe a VHS tape, now even the most violent, depraved acts can be found online with a simple Google search. Our young people are being taught by pornographers about sex, intimacy, and relationships, and begin to explore their sexuality not by fumbling around with each other, but by enacting what they have seen. There is no counter-education to offset this. Our education system seems to be becoming more and more enamoured with the sex-positive approaches curriculum writers see being endorsed by choice feminists. They should not be supporting the notion that this is normal. It is not normal for women to be enthusiastic about being pummeled in every orifice. Boys should not be taught to expect this, and girls should not be taught to think of sex as what they must endure to please men. Girls, women, you are not abnormal for wanting sex to be pleasurable and pain-free. Kids are absorbing messages from morally bankrupt media that are ending in real-life harm. Just ask medical professionals about the increase in anal injuries to young women. Pornography has normalised the image of rough anal sex as if it is a staple part of everyone's sex life. Of course, Teen Vogue has an article that is, quote, "Anal 101 for teens, beginners, and all inquisitive folk," unquote. It tells young women not to tense up because it will ruin the fun, or at least it tells non-prostate havers that. The magazine is determined to groom teen girls into believing they are deficient if they aren't desperate to reenact what they have seen in porn. Young women are exposed to violent sexual imagery and experience extreme sexual degradation before they have even left high school. And the feminists are celebrating this as sex positivity. It is not positive. It is coercion, violence, and disempowerment. We're here to speak up for girls and against violence and sex. The concept of empowerment is used liberally by these so-called feminists. Choice is empowering, apparently. But is choice empowering if women are choosing between a rock and a hard place? How can a woman in a desperate financial situation turn her nose up at sex work when it is celebrated as a career choice, an empowering way to earn money? The National Council of Women are too busy chanting sex work is real work to address the issues that contribute to women being in the situation where they have to consider it in the first place. Strip clubs and pimps are now putting flyers up in universities, appealing to stressed, strapped-for-cash young women with mounting student loans. Whereas once the University Feminist Society would have swooped in to put a stop to this grooming, now they're cheerleading from the sides. Sex work is real work. The feminist position to take in regards to prostitution is to condemn the exploiters and support the prostituted woman. Decriminalisation has further disempowered already vulnerable women and made the government and advocacy groups complacent. But don't take my word for it. I'm going to share with you an account from a member of Speak Up for Women who knows exactly what decriminalisation has done to prostituted women. The cops knew what was going on was illegal, but they turned a blind eye as long as no other laws were being broken, e.g. drug dealing or gang association. I felt that the illegality of it always kept men a little on edge. The slight shame, the walk in the shadows, the offer of using the exit at the back to leave. While it was illegal, they were being told by society that it was their shame too, even if they passed on that shame. After decrim, nothing changed, but it did. I felt less safe. Looking back, it was a shift in structure. More responsibility was on us. We were responsible for money-related transactions now, which messed up with the illusion. It also meant a power struggle in the room. They expected more. These men saw us as objects. It was so much like a transaction. Now we were commodities that they legally bought. We both knew it. We worked harder to keep the men happy. We were less protected. The madams were less one of us. After decrim, there were fees for everything and no mercy. The sense of solidarity was gone between the girls because we worked to appointment. Legal was hell. Keeping the shame of illegality hanging over them was my biggest weapon. That myth was taken away along with the tiny bit of protection it offered. They are disempowered. They are products, and Johns are the empowered ones, with no consequences for purchasing a woman's body. Websites have sprung up where Johns swap notes and write reviews for women. TripAdvisor for prostitutes. They are quick to complain to the front desk if the woman they have hired is not compliant enough or enthusiastic enough. A bad review from a John can severely impact a prostituted woman's income potential. They are disempowered. We are called swerfs for saying this. A close relative to the word TERF, it stands for sex worker exclusionary radical feminist. It is inaccurate, another linguistic trick to make it difficult for people to oppose a pro-prostitution position. We are not sex worker exclusionary. We are anti-prostitution, anti-exploitation of women, anti-pimps. We favour a Nordic model of managing prostitution where the Johns and pimps are criminalised, but the prostituted are not. Where are New Zealand's established groups in this? The ones that receive funding and have access to resources. How can they think that telling suffering women that their exploitation is real work is any kind of comfort? The image of the happy hooker is an anomaly. These feminists are just cogs in the wheel of sexual exploitation of women. Justice Susan Glazebrook wrote about the unwillingness of the New Zealand government and relevant organisations to admit any problem with prostitution and trafficking following decriminalisation. She said, "While the New Zealand government has stated that there is no evidence of trafficking in New Zealand, it is nevertheless apparent that New Zealand children are engaged in prostitution, and one estimate is that up to 200 under 18-year-olds are working in the sex industry." The United States Department of State report seems to operate on the assumption that the legalisation of the sex industry has masked the trafficking that occurs in the industry. For example, it was stated in the report that an assumption that all women engaging in prostitution do so willingly appears to underpin official policy and programs in New Zealand and has inhibited public discussion and examination of indications that trafficking exists within both the decriminalised and illegal sex industries. It is time for public discussion. The decriminalisation of prostitution in New Zealand is long overdue its intended review. Pimps and madams have controlled the narrative for too long, so we are here to speak up for women who've been prostituted and trafficked. Recently, we've made progress towards removing abortion law from the Crimes Act and into healthcare legislation. This should be something we can all come together on. However, choice feminists, not so much. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in another stoush. Instead of protecting the long overdue legislation change from attacks from pro-lifers, far too many of the Select Committee submissions were preoccupied with appealing for the word woman to be stripped from the legislation. There is far too much work still to be done for women's rights, for the organisations and groups claiming to represent us to start dismantling our progress by erasing us from laws pertaining to our bodies. In the words of our own Jan Rivers, legislation should encode material reality where it exists rather than a contested belief system. For now, we wait to see what comes of Select Committee. We can only hope that our elected representatives remember that in all of history, every abortion was performed on a woman. We are here to speak up for women being able to name ourselves. Even greater challenges lie ahead for those of us seeking to protect and advance women's rights. In recent years, new technology and new markets have emerged, and with them new ways for women's bodies to be exploited. Painted as always altruistic and an arrangement of mutual benefit, surrogacy is now an industry worth billions of dollars worldwide. Exploitation quickly arose in countries with large populations of impoverished and vulnerable women. And legislation has also had to be rapidly developed. Countries like India and Thailand have legislated against commercial surrogacy, banning the practice and stemming the flow of wealthy Westerners seeking a host for their child. The market demand is now being funneled into places like the Ukraine, where women are not being protected by legislation. There are plenty of arguments for surrogacy, and some of them are intrinsically well-intentioned, but that doesn't negate the exploitation of women happening on mass and individual levels. As hard as it is to say, having children with your own genetics is not a human right. If it were, there would be working class couples or individuals also engaged in renting wombs, but this is a highly class-dependent issue. This topic warrants a much longer discussion than what is possible tonight, and it is one I suspect we'll find ourselves discussing a great deal more in the near future. One party already has work underway to amend and create legislation around surrogacy in New Zealand. And even in the preliminary stages, the conversation appears to be focused on the rights of the buyer, not the woman. They can expect that we'll be there every step of the way to speak up for women. When under siege, sometimes the best thing to do is simply hold the ground already won. Speak Up for Women has held a lot of ground for women since our inception. But as we grow and more incredible women from all walks of life join us, we can see a future where we aren't always on defence. Women's rights don't just need to be protected, they need to be advanced. As I hope I have shown you tonight, there is still a devastating amount of work to be done in feminism. That's why we're here. That's why you're here. We're here to speak up for women.